The last thing we did in part one was we made our named ranges for our data set in our data tab. What we need to do is go back in there, so use Control F3, and you'll see that we made these big ranges, right? Unfortunately, if we switch the page and we don't have the page reference in there, the ranges don't really know what we're talking about. So we have to include the tab in there. In the indirect function, right before the address, I'm going to go ahead and type in quote data, exclamation point, quote, and then ampersand. And that should do it. So if I highlight that now, no matter what sheet I'm on, it always goes to that column. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for all of these. And then for the sum range as well. Okay, so now that that's done, what we can do is actually start on our array formulas. So what we need to do here is write a formula that pulls the values in the sales rep column, but doesn't pull all the values in sales rep column. We don't want 600 rows of data. We want unique values, right? Because we want an aggregate. So just like a pivot table, if I were to pivot this data and I were to look at the sum of these numbers, it would give me the unique values of the sales reps rather than giving me 600. So I'm going to do the same exact thing here, but rather than using a pivot, I'm going to be using a formula. So these types of formulas are called arrays. They're pretty complex. I have a video that goes over exactly what we're about to do. So if you want to get a better insight of how this formula works, the video is called Index Arrays Video 2, and I'll post a link in the description. However, if you want to just follow along, that will work too. First thing we want to do is kind of start in the middle of this function, and we're going to start with the match function. So I'm going to go equals match. Our lookup value is going to be big range. Our lookup array is going to be D11 through D11. And our match type is going to be 0. I'm going to make one of these permanent. So if I drag it down, it'll continue to look at the cells before it. And then what I can do is if I highlight this and I go to calculate now, I can expect a bunch of NAs, 661 NAs to be exact. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to pick out the first NA, and how I'm going to do that is with something called an isNA function. What an isNA function does is it finds an NA and then converts it to a true. So if you wrap that around an array, such as the one we have, and go to calculate now, all of a sudden we have a bunch of trues, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is subtract the row of the big range. And what this does is it sort of creates unique values. I'm going to divide that by 1,000. And I think what that will do is it'll, yes, give us a bunch of different numbers, which is exactly what we want. Because we don't want the same numbers because we want to pull unique values. Okay, so the next thing I can do is actually just put a max formula around that. And what this will do is it'll give me the biggest one. Control Shift Enter because, okay, so the next step is to use my match formula. What a match formula does is it looks up a value within a range of values, returns the placement within that range. So what we did here was we created the value we want to look up, and then we're going to look up in a range of values, which we also created right here. So I'm going to type in MAT tab. Our lookup value is this max. Lookup array is going to be this isNA formula. And our match type is going to be 0. And it should bring up 1. And then what I can do is I can use my index formula. And I'm going to use that big range 1 as my array. And then the match will bring up my row number. Control Shift Enter. And we have our first name. As you can see, Jones started repeating itself, and that's because we need to tell it to stop repeating itself once it finds the result equal to one of the results before it. And how we do that is we can use an if statement. So we can go if, and actually we need to wrap an or around it, or. So an or can take in an array and return a true or false if any value is true. So equal to D11 through D11, and I'm going to make not both of them permanent, but one of them permanent. I'm going to close off my or. The value, if true, is going to be double quote or null, and the value of false is going to be this index function. All the way to there. Control-Shift-Enter, and if I copy that down, there you go, all the Jones disappear. So that's exactly what we want to do. Okay, so what's next? Well, we need to do this same exact process for these three, but the only difference would be to change the big range 1 into big range 2. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. I'm actually going to copy the formula, and I'm going to paste it here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move these lookup references to the corresponding cell. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my big range 1 to big range 2. Okay, so now that I go into this and I close it out, I make sure that all of my big range 1s were changed to big range 2. I can close that out with Control-Shift-Enter, drag it down, and it works. So if I were to change this to region, or change it to item, that would work as well. Okay, so I'm just going to do the same thing for the third part of the drill. Go in here, copy, paste, and then change all these to 3. I'm going to move the reference from item into the J15 cell. All right, there you go. That's how you create the unique identifiers from each of the lists pulled. Each one works if I change it. So do the names. And that's basically because we made those dynamic named ranges that switch columns as we switch these drop-downs. Okay, so what's next? Well, the next thing we need to do is use our SUMIFs statement. And what is a SUMIF statement? Well, it's a lot like a SUMIF, but the only difference is rather than having one criteria, we have multiple criterias. The first thing we need to do is create another named range, and this is going to be called our date range. So I'm going to go new. Our range is going to be called big date range, and it's going to basically equal A2 through A ampersand, and then I'm going to match 1 through A and use -1. And this will pull my last row. And then I'm going to wrap this around with an indirect and make sure that it says data. Close it out. Okay, so there it is. So that's my big date range all the way down to 661. All right, so the big date range we're going to actually use for this. Now I go equals SUMIFs. My sum range is going to be big sum range. My criteria range is going to be range 1. Criteria 1 is going to be east, and my criteria 2 range will be my date range. My criteria 2 will be, let's see, so I'm going to go greater than or equal to ampersand this value. My criteria 3 range will also be big date range, and my criteria 3 will be less than or equal to ampersand this range. That should work. I'm going to drop that down, and I need to make sure that the reason these came up as zeros is because this whole thing shifted down, so I need to make sure that those values are locked. Pull that down, and there you go. So what I can do here is get rid of these zeros, is write a little if statement. So if I go, if this value equals double quotes or nothing, my value if true is nothing, and my value if false is going to be that SUMIFs formula. Okay, so I can drop that down, and there you go. We're going to use that exact same idea for the following, except we're going to go even further. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this formula, paste it here. I'm actually going to add a new criteria. So this should be big range 2, because we're comparing it with G14, and this is the second big range. And then we also need to add a new one. My new criteria range is going to be big range 1, and then my criteria 1 is going to be the selection that we make right here. Lock that cell. Okay, so now I can do the same thing for the third drill. I'm going to go ahead and type in pencil here, which I'm just going to copy the cell, paste it. Next thing I need to do is add another criteria range and criteria. So my criteria range 3 would be big range 3, and my criteria 3. Okay, and there you go. That's how you create the summations of each one of these. Just when you thought we were done with named ranges, we actually have 2 more to make, and that is for these drop downs. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just write my reference right here, and I'm going to match a blank value within this array. Match type is going to be 0. And you know what? I'm going to go up to 50. And then I'm going to add 11 to that. So that's 23. You know what? I only need to add 10. So that's C12 through C12. I always separate my text and formulas with ampersands, then use an indirect function around that, and that should work. Go into my name manager, Control F3, new. This is going to be big drop 1. Okay, so it actually needs to be in the D part. So I'm going to change that to D. Check it. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to repeat that process for my other fields, and I'm going to change this to G because that's the field we're dealing with. And I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Control F3 to get in my name manager. And I'm going to paste that there. I'm going to start this at 14. Okay, there you go. Perfect. All right, so what we can do now is go into here, go ahead and delete these values, and then you can go Alt-A, VV for data validation, Tab L for list. Once list is hit, you can hit F3, and this brings up all of your name managers. So I'm going to go big drop 1. Okay, and then for this one, I'm going to do the same thing. Alt-A, VV, Tab L, Tab F3, and then big drop 2. All right, so this should have all of my names right here, and then this should have everything represented under here, like that. So right now we have Sorvino selected, so what we'd like to do is make a conditional format that kind of tells us that he is selected. So I always start my conditional formatting at the top left, and what I'm going to do is go to my Home tab, Conditional Formatting, New Role, and then I'm going to use a formula to define the format. So just like a regular format, you start out with equals. I'm going to go does this, and you notice it has dollar signs in front of it and in between it, which means it's locked vertically and horizontally. Does that equal that? And what I'm going to do is get rid of the dollar signs. And if the answer is true, a nice blue border, and I'll change the color of the font too. Okay, so what we can do is I'm going to just format paint this whole thing. Okay, so I did make a mistake. So if I go to Manage Rules, and what I should do is actually put this dollar sign to the left, like that. So that means that my numbers on the sales side will also get formatted as well. I'm going to apply it, and as you can see, that got formatted also. I'm going to get rid of my zeros. We had a comma, but no zeros. Okay, so I'm going to do the exact same thing here. Go New Role, use a formula, see whether this equals this. Press F4 twice to get that dollar sign on the left side to lock it horizontally. Italic. Okay, and then I'm going to format paint all of that. So if I select pen, you can see that that is formatted as well. Okay, so that's how you create a drill down menu in Excel. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, you can either email me at xlsxgeek@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a comment below.